It was a cold, gray morning when the officers arrived. The streets had been silent for hours, with only the occasional hum of a passing car. But today, something felt different. A small crowd had gathered outside an old rundown building that had once been a thriving store. Now it was just a place for people to sleep, for those with nowhere else to go. Among them was Tom, his face weathered by years of struggle. A homeless veteran, his body was frail, and his clothes, though worn, still held a sense of dignity. He was sitting near the entrance of the building, eyes fixed on the ground. His hands were folded in his lap, the tips of his fingers trembling slightly. A man of few words, Tom never asked for help, never caused any trouble. He simply existed in the shadows, unnoticed by most, but not today. The officers approached him, and he didn't move, didn't flinch. He knew what was coming. They accused him of trespassing. He wasn't allowed to stay there, they said, and he needed to leave immediately. Tom just stared at them, not saying a word. It wasn't the first time he'd been moved along, but today, something felt different. As the officers grabbed his arms to take him into custody, he sighed, resigned to his fate. This was just another day in the life of a man who had given everything for his country, only to be forgotten by it. The courtroom was cold, and the hum of the air conditioner was the only sound that filled the room. Tom sat in the defendant's chair, his head slightly bowed. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, his knuckles pale. The judge looked over at him, waiting for an explanation. He had seen many faces like Tom's in the courtroom before, but there was something about this man that made him pause. The prosecutor, a man with sharp eyes and a confident demeanor, spoke first. He was quick to label Tom as just another homeless man breaking the law, as if that defined who he was. Trespassing, the prosecutor said, with a tone that could cut through steel. This man has been living in a building without permission. He's nothing more than a nuisance to society. The words stung, but Tom didn't react. He just sat there, silent, as the prosecutor went on. Tom had grown used to being labeled, to being invisible to the world. But what no one knew, what no one had ever asked, was the story behind the man who sat before them. The room fell into a hushed silence as Tom was finally given the chance to speak. His voice was soft at first, barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of untold stories. "I didn't mean to trespass," Tom began, his eyes lifting slowly to meet the judge's gaze. "I never wanted to cause trouble." His words were shaky, like he hadn't spoken to anyone in a long time. He paused for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. The judge, a man who had seen it all in his career, leaned forward. He sensed there was more to this case than met the eye. Tom continued, his voice growing steadier. "I was a soldier, a long time ago. I fought in the war. I gave everything for this country. My friends, my brothers, they didn't make it back. And when I came home, I didn't have a place to go. I lost everything. My family, my home, even my hope." He looked down again, his eyes glassy, the pain clear in his expression. The courtroom was still, and for the first time, people began to see him not as just a homeless man, but as someone who had sacrificed so much, only to be forgotten. Tom swallowed hard, then looked up at the judge, his voice now stronger. "I didn't ask for this life. I didn't ask to be left behind, but I'm still here. I don't have much, but I just wanted a place to sleep, a place where I wouldn't be chased away." He let out a long breath, the weight of his words hanging in the air. There was a long pause. The judge's expression softened, his eyes betraying a hint of understanding. The prosecutor, however, stood there, speechless for the first time. The judge sat back in his chair, his hands folded in front of him, clearly moved by Tom's words. The prosecutor, on the other hand, seemed to be struggling with the sudden shift in the atmosphere. He had expected the usual response from a homeless person: defiance, anger, or indifference. But this was different. Tom wasn't just a criminal. He was a person with a story, one that no one had bothered to listen to until now. The judge cleared his throat and addressed Tom, his voice gentle but firm. "Thank you for sharing that with us. It's clear that you've been through a lot, but there are laws, and they must be followed. The question is, what happens next?" Tom nodded, his heart heavy. He had expected to be punished, to be sent back to the streets. But then, something happened that none of them could have predicted. From the back of the courtroom, a woman stood up. She was well dressed, her face serious but kind, She walked slowly toward the front, catching everyone's attention. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice calm yet commanding. "But I need to speak." The judge raised an eyebrow, surprised by her sudden appearance. "And you are?" The woman smiled softly. "I'm Sarah Miller. I'm here because of Tom." She paused, glancing at him before continuing. "I'm his daughter." A gasp went through the courtroom. Tom's eyes widened, his face a mix of confusion and disbelief. He had no idea she was here, and he hadn't seen her in years. "I've been looking for him," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "For years. I didn't know he was here, but I'm here now. I want to help him." The room fell silent again, but this time it was the kind of silence that held hope. Tom sat there, frozen, unable to process what was happening. His daughter, his own flesh and blood, standing right in front of him. He had lost track of time, of the years that had passed, and he had never expected to see her again. Not after everything that had happened, not after he'd lost her all those years ago when he was sent to war, when his life spiraled out of control. Sarah's voice trembled as she continued, her words filled with emotion. "Dad, I've spent years trying to find you. I never gave up hope. I know what you've been through. I know the pain, the loss, and I'm so sorry, but I'm here now. I'm not leaving you again." Tom could hardly speak. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His heart was racing, a mix of overwhelming joy and pain that he hadn't felt in so long. He wanted to reach out, to pull her close, but he was afraid. Afraid that if he did, it would all be a dream. The courtroom was silent, every eye on the two of them. The judge, the prosecutor, even the officers who had arrested him earlier, all of them were watching, witnessing a moment none of them had expected. Sarah took a few steps closer to Tom, her hands trembling. "I've been working to find a way to help people like you, Dad. Veterans who are forgotten, who fall through the cracks. I'm starting a nonprofit for them. And I want you to be part of it. I want to make sure no one else goes through what you did. No one else feels as alone as you did." Tom finally found his voice raw and thick with emotion. "I didn't think anyone cared. I didn't think anyone would remember me." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to hold back the tears. "I'm so sorry, Sarah, for everything." Sarah knelt down in front of him, her face full of love and understanding. "You don't have to apologize. You've been through more than anyone should ever have to. But you're not alone anymore. I'm here. We'll figure this out together." The judge, who had been quietly watching the reunion unfold, cleared his throat and addressed the room. "This is a remarkable turn of events. Given the circumstances, I think it's clear that this man deserves more than a criminal charge. I'm dismissing the case. But Tom," he said, turning to the veteran, "you have a chance now. A chance to rebuild, with the support of your daughter. Don't waste it." For the first time in what felt like forever, Tom felt a glimmer of hope. He was still overwhelmed, but there was something in the air, something that had changed. Maybe, just maybe, his life wasn't over. Maybe, there was still time for him to start over. The courtroom was no longer filled with the harsh judgment and cold whispers that had echoed earlier. Instead, there was a quiet warmth, a sense of relief that washed over Tom. The weight of years of pain, loneliness, and regret seemed to lift just a little. He looked at Sarah, his daughter, who was still kneeling in front of him, her eyes filled with love and forgiveness. It was like a dream he had never dared to have, now unfolding in front of him. As they left the courtroom together, the world outside seemed different. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a soft glow on the streets. For the first time in years, Tom felt like he had a future. Sarah had promised him that they would rebuild together, and for the first time, he believed her. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other. Sarah had arranged for Tom to stay with her for a while, and she introduced him to a network of veterans, organizations that offered support for people like him. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was a start. And Tom was willing to try. Days turned into weeks, and Tom began to find peace in the small things. He started seeing a therapist, reconnecting with old friends who were veterans like him. The nonprofit Sarah had mentioned was growing, and with her help, Tom became an advocate for other homeless veterans, speaking out about the challenges they faced. He shared his story, not just as a warning, but as a testament to the strength of those who had given everything, only to be forgotten by the world they had fought for. As for the old building where he had once slept, it was torn down, and in its place, a shelter was built, a safe haven for veterans who, like Tom, had no place to go. It wasn't much, but it was a sign of change, a symbol that things didn't have to stay broken forever. Tom had found a new purpose in life, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was standing tall. Not as a man abandoned by his country, but as someone who had a family, a future, and a voice that mattered. And most importantly, he was no longer invisible. Thank you so much for watching. We hope this story touched your heart as much as it did ours. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment to hit that like button, comment below with your thoughts, and share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another powerful story. Your support means the world to us. Together, we can make a difference. See you in the next video.